Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really substantial. We're diving into a source text that lays out, well, the theological blueprint for how the second deity inherits all of space-time.
Yeah, it's definitely dense. But what's fascinating about this source, I think, is the framework it uses. It gives us this narrative key.
Which is Joseph from Genesis.
Exactly. Joseph's life, his fall, his suffering prison, and then, his rise to power. It's presented as a direct prophetic pattern, a shadow, really, of the second deity's whole journey. Incarnation, death, resurrection, and ultimate sovereignty.
Okay, so that's our mission then. We need to unpack this Joseph analogy step by step. We'll trace it from the humiliation part.
The descent, yeah.
Right, the descent, through the mechanics of atonement, and the source gets really specific about body and blood, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. Very technical.
And then ending with how this leads to inheriting, well, everything, the cosmos. And for you listening, we know this involves some heavy terms, things like Hades, the Satan Garret.
Jefesh, Pneuma,
Yeah.
soul, spirit.
We'll break those down. We want to get to the why. Why suffering? Why was that the path?
And how does atonement target free will specifically? What does it even mean to remove the possibility of sin forever? We need to understand the kind of celestial logic behind this inheritance.
All right, let's jump in. Section 1. The descent into humiliation and Hades, starting right at the bottom, with Joseph's betrayal. So it kicks off with Joseph's brothers. They strip him of that coat, the famous
Coat
one.
of many colors, yeah.
Highly symbolic.
And then they throw him into a pit, Genesis 37, a waterless pit. And right away, the source says this stripping, this casting down. It's theological, it's about self-emptying.
Yes, and let's pause on that coat for a second. In the analogy, that coat represents glory, doesn't it? Favor, authority delegated from the Father. So being stripped is, well, it's laying aside divine rights.
Like Philippians 2, emptied himself.
Precisely. The Creator becomes a servant. It's not just an idea. It's a tangible act of humiliation. He becomes Adam. And the pit itself, the source gets very specific. It's not just any hole. It says waterless pit symbolizes Hades.
Right, the realm of the dead. But then it adds another layer, linking it back to the very beginning, Genesis 1.2.
The formless and void earth.
Yeah. The source sees that initial chaos not just as empty, but as a kind of confinement space, a pre-existing prison almost, where this entity, the Satan Garret, was already held.
Okay, hold on. Satan Garret. We need to define that. What is the source implying with that term?
Garret suggests like a primary form, a chief. So Satan Garret is pointing to let's say, the original adversary, the very first being to rebel. And by connecting it to Genesis 1.2, the source is saying this entity was already bound somehow in the foundations of creation.
Bound in what later becomes known as Hades or the abyss.
That seems to be the interpretation, yes. So think about what that means. The second deity, the creator, deliberately enters this prison complex.
By becoming Adam.
Yes. Confining himself to the same realm where the primordial enemy was already contained. It's the ultimate act of identification, isn't it? Entering the enemy's prison, taking on Adam's limitations.
It really deepens that idea of self-emptying. He's not just visiting, he's submitting to the rules of that place.
And immediately after this confinement comes the sale, the betrayal into actual slavery.
Joseph sold to the Ishmaelites. And the parallel is the 30 pieces of silver for the second deity, Matthew 26.
And again, the source zooms in on the legal detail. It's not just a price. 30 pieces of silver is specifically linked to Exodus 21.32.
Which is?
The compensation for a gored servant, the minimum price for a slave killed by an ox, essentially.
Wow. Why emphasize that specific law?
Because it reduces the second deity to property value, the absolute minimum legal worth. It cements the humiliation. The creator is priced like damaged goods, like a gored slave.
And even though he's sinless.
Right. By taking Adam's form, by accepting this valuation, he is, in a cosmic legal sense, regarded as a servant of sin. He's aligning himself with transgressors, voluntarily.
Isaiah 53 comes to mind, numbered with the transgressors, bearing their sin.
Exactly. And that identification, that bearing of sin, leads directly from being sold as a servant to the next stage. Wrongful imprisonment. Hashtag Shag 1.2 imprisonment in the shadowy valley. So Joseph's situation gets worse. He goes from slave to prisoner, falsely accused, Genesis 39. And for the source, this is the creator descending even further into the dominion of death itself.
So the confinement in Hades, the pit, that's one level. But this prison confinement is deeper, closer to actual death.
It's described as confinement even unto death, referencing Acts 2.23. And it draws on Psalm 23, the valley of the shadow of death. And that cry from Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?
It sounds like total abandonment, but still voluntary.
Absolutely voluntary, yet total in its experience. And here the source makes a really interesting point to maintain the creator's distinct nature. It says, he's passing through death, but death and life, they're merely creatures.
Creatures, like created things, Romans 8.
Exactly. So, while he undergoes the experience of death, he's fundamentally superior to it. Death and life are just part of the created order he's passing through. It shows the depth of humiliation, but also his transcendence.
The creator submitting to the domain of a creature he made, death. That's quite a paradox.
It is. It underlines his mastery even in submission. If death is a creature, then the creator passing through it ultimately shows its limits, its subservience. He endures it for a purpose.
And that purpose, the source insists, is bearing Adam's sin. Joseph was innocent but jailed.
Yeah.
The second deity, innocent, takes Adam's sin and goes to the cross. Galatians 3.13 being made a curse.
Right. So this whole first phase is about total identification with prisoner, the betrayed, the slave, the sinner, and finally the one subject to death.
He's legally fulfilled the penalty associated with being a servant, a transgressor. He's paid the price, endured the confinement.
He has. He's met the legal requirements of sin's consequences, and having done that, the stage is set for the next act. The mechanism of atonement itself, symbolized by what happens in Pharaoh's court.
All right, section 2. This feels like the turning point. How does all that suffering actually achieve atonement? The source uses Pharaoh's court, right? The third day event, hashtag tag 2.1, Pharaoh's feast and prophetic fulfillment.
Precisely. Genesis 40. Pharaoh's birthday feast happening on the symbolic third day after the dreams. And you have this dramatic separation. The cupbearer is restored, given life back, essentially.
On the baker.
The bakers hang. Death. So, life and death decided on the third day. The source jumps right on this as the allegory for the sacrifice.
It's like a mini drama of the crucifixion and resurrection. Let's unpack the players in this allegory according to the source.
Okay. First, Pharaoh. Now, usually Pharaoh is the bad guy. But here, in this specific analogy, he represents the first deity, the ultimate authority figure who judges and decides destinies.
Interesting switch. So Pharaoh's judgment reflects the divine decision.
That's the idea. Then you have the elements of sacrifice. The wine, represented by the cupbearer and his restoration, symbolizes the second deity's blood.
The blood of the new covenant, Luke 22, for forgiveness.
Exactly. Blood associated with life, access, redemption.
In the bread, the baker.
That symbolizes the second deity's body. And the source immediately connects this body to the veil mentioned in Hebrews 10.
The veil in the temple that was torn.
Yes. The body hanging on the cross is the veil being torn, opening the way.
Okay, so follow the separation. The cupbearer restored, that's the blood, the life principle. Hebrews 10 says the blood gives us courage or boldness to enter the Holy of Holies.
Right. The life aspect enters the heavenly sanctuary, achieving purification and access.
While the baker hanged, that's the body, death. Hebrews 13 talks about the body suffering outside the camp.
That's the crucifixion aspect. The physical body bears the curse, dies publicly. But the life essence, symbolized by the blood, is presented within the sanctuary to cleanse. This separation body judged outside, lifeblood presented inside, is the core mechanic of atonement here.
And this whole event, the separation and restoration death, happens on the third day, just like the resurrection.
Exactly. It confirms death couldn't hold him, referencing Hosea 6.2. The sacrifice is accepted, the Creator validated, but the implications are cosmic, not just personal. Hashtag tag 2.2, the blood and the scope of atonement.
Yeah, the source broadens the scope massively here. The blood shed on the cross isn't just for individuals, it's conceptually applied to the heavenly throne, the sanctuary itself. Hebrews 9 mentions cleansing heavenly things.
Cleansing heaven, so the effects of sin reached even there.
Apparently so. And the outcome, according to Colossians 1.20, is the reconciliation of all things. Things in heaven, things on earth. Everything affected by the transgression.
Wow, so it's not just forgiving sinners, it's purifying the entire creation. That's the claim. The source calls to the atonement of space-time, like the Day of Atonement rituals in Leviticus 16, where the high priest cleansed the whole tabernacle complex, but now scaled up to the entire cosmos.
Okay, but what is this blood that cleanses space-time? It can't just be physical blood doing that, can it?
Good question. The source clarifies. The blood that enters the Holy of Holies is interpreted as representing the life, or more specifically, the soul of the second deity. It uses the Hebrew word nephesh.
Nephesh, we hear that a lot. So it's his life force, his essential being.
Yes. Isaiah 53 says he poured out his soul nephesh unto death. Physical blood is the symbol, the signifier. But nephesh is the substance. It's the seat of consciousness, will, identity.
So by offering his nephesh, he's offering his very self, his conscious existence.
That's the depth of it. That life, that nephesh, is what enters the sanctuary conceptually to achieve this universal atonement.
And the reason such a huge cosmic cleansing is needed, it all traces back to sin, which came from transgression.
Which was only possible because of free will. You follow the chain back, and the ultimate source, the thing that enabled the problem, is free will itself.
That's a huge leap. So the solution has to address the root cause.
That's the logic. If free will's choice could defile space-time, then the atonement must not only cleanse space-time, but also deal decisively with the nature of free will, which leads us right into the philosophical core.
All right, section 3. This feels like the heart of the matter. If the goal is to wipe sin out of the cosmos for good, we have to ask, what exactly is being redeemed or fixed here? Hashtag 3.1, the location and consequence of free will.
Exactly. Where did the problem start? With the choice. So the source identifies the primary target of atonement as free will. It points to Isaiah 1, perhaps implying that offerings are useless if the will isn't right. Since the transgression came from the will itself must be addressed.
And where does Adam's free will reside, according to this source?
In his soul, the nephesh. That's the center of choice, personality. But crucially, the soul acts through the body.
Ah, so they're linked in transgression.
Correct. Because the soul sins via the body, both are liable for the penalty. Ezekiel 18 says the soul that sins shall die. Matthew 10 talks about destroying both soul and body in Gehenna, the lake of fire.
So the body gets condemned too, not because it has free will, but because it's the soul's instrument for sinning.
That seems to be the logic, which makes the redemption strategy very focused. The price paid, the second deity's nephesh, his life, symbolized by the blood, is aimed at buying back Adam's soul and body, ransoming them.
Buying them back from what? From destruction?
From being cast into that final lake of fire, yeah.
Sure.
1 Corinthians 6 talks about being bought with a price, and this happens through substitution. The second deity being forsaken on the cross, taking the sinner's place. Matthew 27, the cry of dereliction.
Okay, but if the ransom targets the soul with free will and the body, its instrument, how does this square with what happens to people after redemption? This leads to some debate within the source itself, right? Hashtag 3.2, competing views on atonement scope.
Yes, the source actually presents a couple of different perspectives on just how far the atonement needed to reach.
Right.
It's trying to get really precise about what was covered.
Okay, what's the first view? The soul-focused one.
This view is pretty straightforward. It says, look, free will is in the soul, nephesh. The body just follows orders. It doesn't have its own independent will. So if you atone for the soul, you automatically cover the subservient body, redeem the master, you get the servant too. No need to pay twice, essentially.
Seems efficient, clean logic. But the source pushes back on that, doesn't it?
It does. It immediately brings up the nature of the resurrection body. The ultimate destiny isn't just getting the old body back fixed. It's getting a spiritual body. Pneumatikos. Not the old psychikos body.
Okay, define those terms again. Psychikos versus pneumatikos.
Psychikos is the natural soul-driven body, animated by the nephesh. It's mortal, subject to sin, has that problematic free will engine, if you like. Pneumatikos is the spiritual body, animated, governed directly by the Holy Spirit deity. Pneumato. It's immortal, perfected, operates on a different principle entirely.
So 1 Corinthians 15 and Romans 8 point to this upgrade.
Right. The fact that we get a pneumatikos body suggests the atonement wasn't just about rescuing the old psychikos model, but enabling a complete replacement with something fundamentally better. It's transformation, not just repair.
That definitely complicates the simple just redeem the soul view. Okay, what's the other debate? The broader scope one? This brings in the spirit.
Yeah, this is where it gets even more complex. If soul and body are covered, what about Adam's spirit, the human spirit, pneuma? Does that need atonement too? And this immediately bounces back to the second deity. Did he surrender his own pneuma on the cross?
We read those verses, Luke 23, Matthew 27. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Yielded up his spirit.
Exactly. But the source asks, what is that spirit he's yielding? Is it his unique divine pneuma? Or is it conceptually referring to the Holy Spirit deity's presence within him, as per Romans 8?
That's a deep theological knot. Because if the human spirit, or his divine spirit, is inherently connected to God and can't sin,
then it doesn't need atonement in the same way the soul, nephesh, does. It can't be subject to death or the lake of fire. So the source leans towards understanding the surrender of the spirit as maybe the completion of his life offering, or the separation experienced in death, but not as the pneuma itself being ransomed. The liability, the core issue, remains the nephesh with its free will.
Okay, so this debate seems to circle back to the nephesh as the primary target requiring ransom. Anything else is either covered implicitly or needs cleansing, not ransoming. Hashtag tag 3.3 core versus peripheral atonement.
And that leads to the source's distinction between core and peripheral atonement. What needs a price paid versus what just needs to be cleansed.
The source is clear. Things without free will don't need a ransom price. Animals, trees, rocks, they can't sin, so they can't be charged. Deuteronomy 20 is referenced about not destroying trees in warfare. They aren't liable.
Right, you can't hold a mountain legally responsible. But, and this is the crucial part that explains the atonement of space-time, these things do still get atoned for. Why?
Because they were defiled, polluted by the sin of beings with free will, like the altar, the tent, the land itself in Numbers 35 and Leviticus 16.
Exactly. Sin has collateral damage. It stains its surroundings. So you need two things: a ransom payment for the entity with free will, the soul, and a purification ritual for everything else that got defiled as a consequence. Judicial guilt versus ritual contamination.
One requires a price, the other requires cleansing by the application of that price.
Precisely. If free will hadn't sinned, there'd be no defilement, no need to cleanse the cosmos. The cosmic cleanup is secondary to the ransom of the will.
So the source finally lands on the core target as
the free will that can defile its surroundings, and the will capable of transgression. That's the root. Address that, pay its price, and then apply the results, the blood life, to cleanse the defiled environment. Colossians 1.20 again. Reconciling all things.
And the ultimate endgame isn't just wiping the slate clean, it's preventing it from ever getting dirty again.
That's the ultimate objective, the total annihilation of sin, 1 Corinthians 15. And as the source puts it, the permanent removal of the possibility of transgression in space-time forever. Revelation 15 seems to point to that final state.
Removing the possibility, that's staggering. It means the redeemed creation is fundamentally secured against another fall. The risk posed by free will is finally neutralized.
And achieving that state, is the ultimate validation of the second deity's mission. Which brings us smoothly to the payoff. The ascent, the exaltation, the inheritance.
Section 4.
Right. So having endured the depths, the narrative now mirrors Joseph's dramatic rise from prison to power. The humiliation was the necessary prelude to receiving universal authority. Hashtag tag 4.1, Joseph's elevation and royal authority.
Genesis 41. 2 years after those prison dreams, that symbolic third-day time frame again, Joseph is suddenly yanked out of the dungeon and made ruler of all Egypt, second only to Pharaoh.
And look at the symbols he receives. Pharaoh's signet ring.
Which means he can make decrees in Pharaoh's name. Delegated power.
Exactly. Fine linen robes.
Purity, status, like a priest or king.
And the gold chain. High rank, public honor. These earthly symbols directly parallel the second deity's cosmic exaltation.
So the resurrection isn't just proof of life, it's the official recognition. Romans 1 says he was declared Son of God with power by the resurrection. Psalm 2 confirms him as the heir.
The heir to all things. And the source explicitly defines this inheritance. He's exalted above every name, Philippians 2, and given all authority in heaven and on earth, Matthew 28. This is the inheritance of space-time. He now owns and rules the entire cosmos, legally.
Total dominion. But how he rules, the mechanism, brings us back to that tricky Pharaoh analogy, hashtag 4.2, the role of the first deity's name.
Yeah, this is where the source uses Pharaoh in that counterintuitive way again, not as the enemy, but in this specific context of delegated authority as representing the first deity.
Why do that? Why use the symbol of Egypt's ruler for the first deity?
To make a specific point about how Joseph ruled. He ruled using Pharaoh's name, under Pharaoh's ultimate sovereignty. The power was real, but the authority flowed from Pharaoh.
So the parallel is that the second deity, having completed his work as a creature, now rules space-time, but he does so in the name of the first deity.
That's the interpretation. 1 Peter 3 talks about him being at God's right hand with authority subject to him. John 5, he says he comes in his Father's name, the inheritance is his, but the foundational name, the ultimate authority he wields, belongs to the first deity.
So it's not a rival kingdom, but the execution of the original kingdom's authority through the designated heir.
Precisely. And this exaltation also confirms the victory. Death and sin are conquered, 1 Corinthians 15. The judgment mentioned in John 12 against the ruler of this world, perhaps that Satan glory is now finalized. The one confined in the pit has overthrown the pit's power. The war is won, the legitimate ruler installed, wielding the name. Hashtag 4.3, the imperative of obedience.
But wait, he said he came in his Father's name before the cross too, right? John 5 again? So was obedience mandatory then, or only after the resurrection and inheritance?
The source seems to distinguish between inherent status, and, let's say, the universally recognized formalized status. Philippians 2 suggests that the exaltation and the universal confession came after his obedience unto death.
So the cross wasn't just atonement, it was the necessary event for creation to formally acknowledge his inherited authority.
It seems that way. The finished work triggers the formal recognition. However, and this is crucial, the source stresses that this timeline doesn't affect his fundamental nature, inheritance or not, formally recognized or not.
He is God.
He is God, and therefore submission is mandatory for all creatures,
Yeah.
angels, humans, even the defeated powers like the Satan great, always. Hebrews 1 talks about angels worshiping him at the incarnation. Luke 20, the parable of the tenants rejecting the son that's rebellion against inherent authority.
So obedience is required because he is God, full stop. The inheritance just adds another layer, the formal right to rule creation as the victorious heir.
Exactly. His divine nature commands worship. His inheritance confirms his rightful rule over space-time. But if he was already God, and obedience was already mandatory, why the cross? Why the suffering? It seems almost unnecessary just for legal inheritance. Which pushes us to the final section, the deeper purpose.
Right. Section 5. If he already had the inherent right, why go through all that? The source must argue it was about demonstrating something profound to creation. Tagged 5.1, proving God's love and justice.
Pressy. The source argues the cross wasn't just about atonement mechanics. It was fundamentally about demonstrating God's character, specifically his love and his justice to all created beings. Romans 5.8, God demonstrates his own love for us in this.
How does one event prove both love and justice? They can seem contradictory.
Well, it proves justice because the law's penalty for sin death, separation, was fully paid. God didn't just wave it away, he upheld his own righteous standard. But it proves love because the one paying the penalty was God himself, the second deity, substituting for the guilty creatures.
The judge taking the sentence for the condemned.
Exactly. The source suggests this is the ultimate demonstration of love giving oneself for those who were in rebellion. And this demonstration is vital because, as 1 John 4 says, we love because he first loved us.
So creatures couldn't truly, freely love God back until they knew definitively that God loved them sacrificially. Before that, obedience might just be fear.
That's the implication. The cross enables a response of genuine love and willing obedience, shifting the relationship from mere obligation to, ideally, familial devotion. It moves beyond fear or compulsion.
So the cross achieves reconciliation, Colossians 1 again, by revealing God's heart, making a love-based relationship possible. But incredibly, the source says even this isn't the absolute final proof.
This is the most startling part, I think. The cross and resurrection lay the foundation, prove the case almost completely, cement the inheritance. But the final exhibit, the conclusive evidence presented to the cosmos, that comes later. Hashtag 5.2, the church is the final witness.
And it comes through us, the church, redeemed people.
Yes. The source asserts God will finally demonstrate his perfect love and justice through the saints, the redeemed community, indwelt by the Holy Spirit deity. Revelation 6, the souls under the altar, maybe points to this ongoing testimony.
Wow. So the ultimate proof isn't the divine act of resurrection itself, but the result of that act lived out in flawed, redeemed creatures.
Think about it. Angels and other beings watched free will lead to disaster, the Satan garret, Adam's fall. They saw the incredible cost of redemption on the cross. The lingering question must be, did it work? Is this redeemed creation stable? Will they choose rightly this time?
So the church becomes the living evidence that the plan succeeded.
That's the argument. Ephesians 3 says the church exists to display God's manifold wisdom to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. We are, in effect, Exhibit A.
What wisdom are we showing them specifically?
We're showing that creatures who once chose rebellion, when redeemed and indwelt by the Spirit, can now choose sustained, voluntary faithfulness and love. It demonstrates that God's plan didn't just forgive, it transformed the will itself, or at least its operation.
This connects back to that Job passage, right? Can creatures remain faithful?
It seems to. The source suggests this ongoing, lived-out faithfulness of the church dispels any final doubts among the angels. It confirms the truth and goodness of God's ways and eliminates that lingering potential for transgression, solidifying the eternal security of the cosmos.
So the final nail in the coffin of sin, the thing that proves its defeat, 1 Corinthians 15, isn't just the empty tomb, but the saints living out their redemption.
That's the profound implication. The church becomes the ultimate cosmic witness, proving that God's justice is righteous, his love is powerful enough to change hearts, and his plan has successfully secured free will within loving obedience forever. It guarantees the stability of that inherited space-time.
That puts a rather immense significance on the life of the believer. #outro.
It really does. So wrapping up this deep dive, we've traced an incredible theological arc, starting with the second deity's descent into humiliation, identifying right down to the level of the confined Satan create in Hades.
Then we examined the atonement mechanism, the Joseph stories, baker and cupbearer, illustrating the separation of body and life, death and access, focusing on the nephesh.
We saw the core target was free will itself, the source of transgression, needing not just forgiveness, but a ransom payment to avert destruction and a cleansing for its defiling effects on space-time.
And that entire process, the suffering and sacrifice, paved the way for his exaltation and the formal inheritance of all authority over the cosmos, ruling in the first deity's name.
But the ultimate purpose went beyond legal standing. It was about proving God's love and justice to creation, aiming for the complete removal of even the possibility of sin ever again.
Which leads to our final provocative thought for you listening. This source material suggests the ultimate proof, the evidence that convinces the heavens and secures the cosmos eternally, isn't just the divine sacrifice, but the ongoing spirit-empowered faithfulness of the Church. Redeemed humanity.
So reflect on that. If the angelic hosts, the principalities and powers, are watching the collective life of the Church as the final confirmation of God's wisdom and the success of his cosmic plan, what weight does that give to the human journey of faith? It suggests every act of obedience, every choice for love over self, resonates with cosmic significance. We become the living proof in the established order of the inherited space-time.
An absolutely staggering thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.